just showed you, if you pull up the Common Core website and you go to exemplary reading text, you can just Google Common Core exemplary reading list. You will find The Bluest Eye. This is some of the most heinous filth I have ever read in my life. You know, adults have no business reading this garbage, much less 10th and 11th grade children. Haven't read this one's The Bluest Eye. The other one that I looked at was a book called Dreaming in Cuban. And I read some excerpts from that book, and that book also, it basically sounded like a gangster rap song put into a story. And it had the most filthy language. But this book also, The Bluest Eye, this book is blasphemous. If you read this book is totally blasphemous.
That's right.
The Dreaming in Cuban, and both these books degrade women. So if you think the war on women is, you know, Republicans are supposed to have the war on women, well, these books right here that have been endorsed by the Common Core Validation Committee and by David Coleman, who is the chief architect of Common Core, who signed off and put these books on an exemplary text list for schools. Do y'all know what exemplary means? That means the best we got that you need to be using. If you look up that term exemplary in the dictionary. So we've got this kind of filth that, I guess the qualification for this, it was on Oprah's book list. So I guess that qualified it in the eyes of those folks that were controlling this validation committee. And the other book, the Dreaming in Cuban, I guess that was part of their multiculturalism task, is to get some authors from some other countries on that book list. And you know, what we've got is we've got trash with no literary value that I could see on this reading list. And I guess probably the only high point in that is the Common Core requires the high school to move to 70% informational text versus classical literature or novels. And that in itself should alarm people that a standard is requiring 30% literature and 70% informational text in the high school, 50% in the elementary and in the middle school. Now, what business does a first grader, a kindergartner, or a second grader have to read government documents, informational text, training manuals, executive orders, or anything such as that, okay? They should be reading stories that make them want to learn and engage them, that things that relate to their life processes and where they are in life, rather than informational text. And the informational text portion of it is, there's no other way or no other conclusion except the fact that that is an avenue to introduce all these government ideologies from different United Nations human rights declarations. That's what a school in Biloxi has required their students in English language arts to learn, is the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. And one thing that that declaration says is that people have equal rights. If a man wants to marry a man, he can marry a man. If a woman wants to marry a woman, they can marry a woman. That is all in that UN Declaration of Human Rights that is being taught as a Common Core, non-fictional, informational text down in one of the high schools in Biloxi. I watched a video with a parent who confronted Dr. House at the Biloxi meeting and said, "Do you realize that this is going on?" And when she was told that they were learning the UN Declaration on Human Rights, Dr. House answer was, "Well, I don't know what that document is. I'm not familiar with it." But I think we need to become familiar with what this is, because they're teaching it to our children in these schools. You know, and the lady had complained to her principal, and the principal was like, "Well, this is what we got to teach with Common Core. This is the type of stuff that they want us to teach." And then over in Louisiana, in Vermilion Parish, I ran across something where a parent had posted what their child was learning in Vermilion Parish, and it was in the newspaper. I pulled the newspaper article. It was basically a play on the word twister, okay? And they had Twista, and that was some kind of rapper, apparently, that wrote a song called Po Pimp. And, you know, a fourth grade kid is asked to read this, and they come home and they ask their mama, "What's a pimp?" You know, and the superintendent of that high school went on record in the newspaper and said, "Well, this is real world stuff. This is what Common Core is telling us that we need to teach these kids, is these informational texts and things that relate to the real world. They're going to see it sooner or later, so we might as well go ahead and prepare for it." That's basically what that principal says in Vermilion Parish, Louisiana. Okay? I've had teachers from all over the state and parents from all over the state take pictures of their kids' assignments that are Common Core related and email them to me. I have seen the most ridiculous. You would faint to know that your taxes are paying for this garbage that they're teaching our kids. That's all under the guise of Common Core. You know, so if you don't think it's an avenue to bring some of this alternative stuff that Mississippians do not value into your school system so that we will have global acceptance of, you know, moral relativism, acceptance of what, you know, every other culture believes. The things that tie us to our beliefs and our values and to our country, a great deal of that comes out of classical literature that we read and things that we've grown up with that make us have that kinship to Mississippi and that kinship to America. You will not see the time spent on Faulkner, Welty, the things that draw us close and keep our hearts tied to our heritage and our past. Common Core, its ultimate design is to get rid of all that. And if you don't believe it, think about the part of it that says we no longer need to teach our kids to read and write in cursive. Common Core totally takes out cursive writing out of the entire curriculum. Now, would your child not want to be able to read, say, your wedding album, a family Bible, a journal, a death certificate, a birth certificate, a marriage license, a letter from a relative from the Vietnam War, or something from World War II that one of your ancestors wrote? We are going to create a generation of illiterate children that cannot read anything that's been produced by somebody who's written it in cursive, okay? And Common Core states that a child only needs to be able to produce a one-page report on a keyboard by the end of 4th grade. So, I'm wondering if we're going to go back to signing an X or printing for a signature. I mean, it's on the street. The kid is not even going to learn how. Maybe that's all they're going to teach them is to write their name in cursive. I don't know. But there was an article in the Sun Herald just came out just yesterday or the day before that Bloomberg has done this big, elaborate endorsement of Common Core, saying that within this technology age that there's better things for kids to be learning in school than cursive writing. That, you know, there's more important things to teach your kids. But in most people's opinion that I've talked to, they think that cursive writing and reading and writing in cursive is a significant handicap, especially reading cursive, would be a significant handicap to a child to have any ties to anything written in their past, from their family, from their heritage. So if you look at all the aspects of Common Core, the fact that it was brought out in the open on what, June 2nd, 2010. If you pull the state board minutes from Mississippi Department of Education, they adopted this stuff 3 weeks after it came out. Okay, 3 weeks. The board minutes say that on a motion by Dr. Wayne Gann, we unanimously adopt these standards due to, quote, imminent peril to the public welfare due to the potential loss of substantial federal funding. That is exact words that are in those board minutes. If you don't believe it, you go Google them, June 25th, 2010. That's exactly why the board said that they adopted Common Core standards, is to get the race to the top money. But guess what? Mississippi didn't get it, a race to the top money. But we still have the implementation of Common Core and the cost, the fact that there's no scientific testing or validation out there that says these standards are going to change anything for the better in our schools. No cost analysis. Legislature was not consulted. This was done through the executive, through the board, and through the governor's office. The Common Core requires that schools be set up technology compatible so that the testing can all be done on computer by a certain date, that all the Common Core testing is going to be done and fed through a computer. So there are many school districts in the state that do not even have the broadband infrastructure in to be able to meet this compliance, and the question remains is who's going to pay for it? You know, the state's probably not going to pay for it, so it's going to be another unfunded mandate to the local districts. And, you know, a lot of these local districts are just making it. Of course, I think most of them can manage their money a little bit better, but nobody needs an ad valorem tax increase at this point in time, a substantial ad valorem tax increase to support this technology requirement that Common Core brings in. And then you go back to the fact that right now, I'm hearing from parents that teachers, there's hardly any textbooks that kids can go by, so parents can't help them at home because this was rolled out before there was any real time to develop materials to go along with so the schools are writing curriculum as they go, and they're trying to figure it out step by step and muddle through it. But once if we get technology compliant in all the schools, you will see less and less reliance on anything that a child can bring home that a parent can see. Because the intent is to move instruction and testing over the web, to have this facilitated and done in the big part through computer. So when that child gets on that computer, there's really no way that you know what that teacher's teaching that child and what that child is learning. And a young child especially doesn't know to come home. They don't know what the warning signs are, and they may not know what to come home and tell mom and daddy that they're learning. So it again removes parents another step away from being able to take part in and help their children and know what they're learning with this technology requirement. So that's another red flag. And the fact that Common Core was adopted in 2010, had to be adopted so quickly, but yet it didn't have to be fully rolled out until 14-15, and then the test didn't have to be fully rolled out until then. This is all done by design, folks. Do you recall another program that was set up that way by the loan administration? Okay, do you see a parallel? Is it ringing a bell with you? Okay, this was designed the same way. I mean, it is textbook, done by design. Slide this thing in there, turn up the heat a little bit at a time, let them get so far invested in it that when they really figure out that the water's boiling, they're already a cooked goose. I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell. And this is kind of what people are starting to realize with Common Core. This consortium, PARC consortium, we've already had a bunch of states that have pulled out. So the idea that the federal government had that everybody's going to have a common test, well, that's out the window, because we've had Oklahoma, now we've seen a letter from Governor Rick Scott in Florida that says they're going to pull out of the PARC consortium, and Rick Scott's reasoning for pulling Florida out of the consortium, you can look at the Miami Herald or the Tampa Bay Times. He basically said that it has come to his realization that staying in this consortium does nothing except give the federal government control over Florida's education, because the federal government has federally backed these consortia to develop these tests. So they're going to do whatever they want to do as far as the testing. Everybody knows that when you have accountability-based education and you have a teacher's evaluation tied to a test, what are they going to teach? The test. Are they going to teach anything else? No. And so this is a perfect storm that's all come together. It's not just an idea that's come from Bill Gates' agreement with UNESCO, but it's there. Anybody can go find it. To globalize education in the United States. It started, this idea, Rita mentioned Mark Tucker. This idea was already in play amongst the progressives in the United States, and that little clique between the Carnegie Foundation, the Annenberg Challenge, Linda Darling Hammond, who is over, is it SBAC that she's over Smarter Balance. Linda Darling Hammond was one of Obama's Chicago radical friends. He was her first choice for the chief of the U.S. Department of Education. He knew she could never get confirmed. That's why he picked Arnie Duncan. But yet he put her in even a more, I would say, dangerous spot than what he put Arnie Duncan in, because she's over SBAC. Has control over this testing consortium. And whatever that they want tested and put in these tests, they're going to get it. So the people have known for years and years, the progressives have known for years and years, the way to change the values, the mores, the culture of a society, to change the whole value system, to transform a country, is through their schools. And we've seen that happen through the last 40 years. You know, liberalization through the universities and in the more populated cities and the more liberal states. We've seen it, you know, down in the elementary school. But we've never seen a great deal of that in Mississippi. We've seen it in pockets and places. You know, your children will have a teacher here or there. But this whole movement was set up by the progressives. This whole entire movement. Mark Tucker, who was a big part of Common Core, He wrote a letter back to Hillary Clinton called the Dear Hillary letter. That letter is widely published. It's about 18 pages long. If you read that letter, it basically tells Hillary Clinton how to promote a human capital development system through the school systems with the least amount of resistance to the public. He basically said what we need to do is we need to create a workforce based on need and demand, not based on choice. So basically this human capital development system that he said that we needed to create for a global workforce based on demand, not on anybody's individual choice. If you read that letter, it talks about national standards, it talks about pretty much everything that has been set forth in Common Core. That letter, that Dear Hillary letter, reads like a movie script of how Common Core has been put in. They basically followed Mark Tucker's Dear Hillary letter and set Common Core up and set it into motion. It's out there. Anybody can read it. I believe the Dear Hillary letter has even been introduced as part of the congressional record. So we're not chasing boogeymen. It's all factual. It's all there. If you evaluate all the moving parts to Common Core, the school districts want to say, well, it's just the standards, and the standards are not bad. If it was only the standards, it wouldn't be that bad. Although I think, for the most part, the standards are bad. I've taught school. I've had 2 children go through school. And I see a lot of bad things in the standards. I see a lot of things in the lower grades that's left out that a child needs to know. What we see is the things that the nomenclature that we've always used in the United States for mathematics, the terms that we've used for mathematics, the terms that we've used for parts of speech and different things like that that we've used that are unique to the United States, all that stuff has been filtered out of the Common Core standards so that it'll move totally to a system that's recognized globally, not one that's unique to the United States. So we see all that. In some of the lower grades, to make people believe the fact that this thing is so rigorous, so that they can sell this as being rigorous, they have thrown some standards in, especially in the math in the lower grades, that the kids have no prerequisites. They don't have the abstract reasoning ability to be even doing some of these standards that they've thrown in the elementary. So they've got developmentally inappropriate standards. I've heard from a ton of teachers and a ton of parents that the way that and you also hear that well, you can get to point A to point B any way you want to. Here's the standards, you get the kids to learn them however you want to learn them. But yet we have schools all over the state, and I have gotten worksheets, emails from parents that they're trying to teach math, addition, not by the traditional algorithms, but by a cognitive left brain method where you start from the left and you abstractly group your numbers and try to do it in your head. They're trying to teach this to the younger kids who don't even have the cognitive development to be able to abstractly do these problems. So that's why you're seeing kids crying at home and mamas and daddies spending 3 or 4 or 5 hours of math homework for a young child to be able to try to master these concepts because they're not developmentally appropriate for that age level. But yet when you get to the high school, you see it slack back off, especially in math. That's why you've had Dr. Milgram say that this is not going to keep anybody from, not going to set up anybody to be able to go in and enter calculus, like as a first year. You would always have to take algebra or something lower than that. And like at Stanford and Purdue and some of these major universities that train engineers, look, calculus is almost considered remedial to some of these fellows that go in, that go into these fields. So, and what Jason Zimba is on record as saying in an educational meeting in Boston, Massachusetts, he admitted this is a community college workforce development program, is what Jason Zimba has said this is. But if you go even further and you read what Mark Tucker's, his notes on the National Center for Education and the Economy, Mark Tucker's plan even takes this farther and says that they believe that children only need to go to high school through 10th grade and have 1 math and 1 language arts. And then they need to get tracked into a workforce development program. So a one-size-fits-all program, and the information is there. It is absolutely there. And that explains why the math is set up like it is into functional categories. You don't have the traditional math classes like Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry. You do have Algebra 2 and Geometry, but you have them set up as functions. You don't have a calculus class, you don't have a trigonometry class. And the big thing I'm hearing from the teachers is there's no continuum in the curriculum. They see a haphazard scattering of standards that they don't have the prerequisites or the scaffolding skills to do. So that's one reason why it seems like it's more difficult than it really is because of the way they set it up. And quite frankly, when I took Mississippi's standards and compared them to the Common Core, I just can't see where we're going to be any better off with the Common Core standards. I see some of those standards that are so vague and convoluted that I could not even figure out as a teacher a way to test those standards. And that's what I've heard from the teachers, very vague. So we've got a setup here that is basically driven and controlled by federal government proxies that the states were, coerced into signing on to through No Child Left Behind waivers and Race to the Top grants. And when the children are tested on computers, we don't know what they're tested on. The teachers may not even know what they're tested on. I don't know that the teachers are even going to see a test. I mean, a lot of that's still left in the dark as to, Dr. House had said at one time the first year we would have paper and pencil tests. But I don't know how we're going to do paper and pencil tests because I have read that the tests are going to be computer adaptive in a large measure. So there's a lot that's really unknown about this. And we've had Utah, Oklahoma, Florida, Alabama, Pennsylvania, Indiana. We've had 8 or 9 states that I can name right now that have dropped out of the testing consortium from the ones that started. They haven't totally rolled out a Common Core, but they figured out that there's enough problem with the government's control over the testing, and that's what Rick Scott says. The avenue for the federal government to have the most control is through that testing consortium. And that was one of his reasons that he put forward to pull Florida out of park. Mike Pence in Indiana, that's the only state that's gone so far as signing a bill into law that says we will halt Common Core until further review, no further implementation. So Mike Pence and his legislature in Indiana has actually been the first state to formally back out all the way from Common Core. But there's a lot of states that are pretty far in the process. There's a senator from Georgia who's working very hard, Senator William Ligon, and Lieutenant Governor Cagle is working with him in Georgia. And the Georgia Department of Education is actually working right now to develop their own test. And they say that because they're developing their own test, that they may not formally unadopt Common Core, but they may not teach it. So they're looking at a way around it and what Mississippi could have done to still have been able to compete for the Race to the Top money, we didn't have to adopt Common Core, but it just so happened that these special interest groups already had Common Core in the works to go ahead and roll out their plan and try to get everybody on it. But we could have taken our own standards. We could have had a panel from IHL and the K-12. We could have had our own people in the state of Mississippi and handpicked them to upgrade Mississippi's current standards, and we could have had them certified through one of the colleges and universities as, quote, college and career ready. And we would have still had our own standards. I believe it was Minnesota was one state that certified and had their own standards certified as college and career ready. And then we could have done something as far as, either collaborating with another state, and we still can do that. That is still open. That's what I'm saying. People think the door is closed on this, but the door does not need to close because we have no more autonomy. If anybody doesn't believe that a test drives the curriculum, you need to go see a psychiatrist because testing with data-driven instruction and results-based evaluation on these tests, there is no way that the testing is not going to drive curriculum. That's just a natural process of it. That's just the way it happens. So there's a couple of things that Mississippi can do if we get out of Common Core. We can make our own standards. Matter of fact, there's conflicting analysis of our standards out there. The Fordham Institute that Bill Gates paid to do all these state comparisons to Common Core, they said, well, Mississippi's math's actually pretty darn good. They need to tweak a few things here and there. We think we'll give them a solid C on math. And they really couldn't find anything in their evaluation that I read that was really wrong with Mississippi's math. They just said we need to clarify a few things, make a few things clear. Said it was great in STEM content in the high schools, and that's what I'm saying. We got a great framework in Mississippi for STEM. Even the Fordham Institute says we do. And when I look at that, I talk chemistry. So I know a little bit about what somebody needs for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. framework that Mississippi has for STEM careers. We do not need Common Core standards for STEM careers in Mississippi. We worry and bellyache why we don't have any kids going into engineering and higher level math. We're sure not going to have them when they get to Common Core, because it's going to take them a year or two in college to catch up in the math to even get ready to take the courses that they're going to need to get into these STEM careers. So, you know, the Fordham says our math's not too bad. They said our English language arts is terrible, is what they said. Well, if you look at some records from the Mississippi Department of Education, they hired a group out of Georgia called Southeast Comprehensive Center to do a standards comparison, just like Fordham did, and to take our standards and align them to Common Core. Well, guess what? Lo and behold, SEDL came out with a total opposite evaluation of what Fordham did. SEDL said, well, your English language arts curriculum, your standards are basically of similar rigor and content with Common Core, but your math standards, they're not even on the chart. So, you know, I mean, that to me invalidates it right there. That invalidates their whole argument. You got Fordham, who's the Gates mouthpiece that's done all these comparisons all across the nation, and then you got SEDL hired by NDE, and they come up with a total opposite evaluation of our standards than what Fordham did. So it's a game. It's a money game for a lot of people. It's a cultural game changer for some other folks. So it basically has come out to be a perfect storm of two different interests, but reaching for the same end goal. And, you know, unfortunately in Mississippi, we have some folks that jumped out there that the MDE got to endorse this and jump on board and say they supported it before they even knew what it was, okay? Well, they're afraid to backtrack now, so they're going to continue to support it. I got an email last week from the Mississippi Economic Council that says we're steadfast in supporting Common Core. Well, I want those engineers from those companies in the Mississippi Economic Council to go and look at the comparison between Mississippi's high school math standards and the Common Core standards. If an engineer is honest with himself, or a mathematician is, because I've talked to several of them, they'll tell you that we already have better high school STEM content than what these standards are. That's what Dr. Milgram said. And we had another mathematician that spoke out on these, that was on the National Council for Mathematics Teachers and was on the California Math Curriculum Validation Committee, a man called Zia Berman, and he did a whole full evaluation, and that's in a white paper that's produced by the Pioneer Institute. That he takes it step by step, and you can read it, and he'll tell you exactly what's missing out of that math content. So there's so much out there that you can look at to show that this is not the rosy thing that people have made it out to be. And you know, anybody that's a good conservative, when you hear the word national standard, your hair ought to stand on end. When you hear one size fits all for education, you hear a testing consortium that's going to have common tests, and the thing is they keep saying it's voluntary. Well, David Coleman, he had enough clout from the Gates Foundation and the Obama administration. As soon as they got done with this and got the states hooked onto it, they put him in the role as National College Board president. First thing David Coleman did when he got put in that position, he said, well, I think we need to rewrite the SAT and the ACT and all that to align to Common Core standards. So those 5 states that didn't sign on, Rick Perry said Texas is not for sale, Virginia didn't sign on, Alaska, Nebraska, and one more, Wisconsin. Scott Breaker. Those states were not supposed to get any punishment because this was voluntary, okay? But when you're rewriting college entrance exams based on Common Core, do you not think these states are going to be some kind of disadvantage? So they're basically still trying to blackmail and entice these other states to sign on to it. Your Christian schools, your private schools, your homeschoolers, these folks do not want to leave one stone unturned. They want every child in this nation on these standards. Okay? I've talked, Archdiocese in New Orleans, they've adopted it. And their folks down there, the parents are going crazy. There's about to be a rally. A Louisiana legislator from Metairie announced last night that he is going to file a bill to get Louisiana out of Common Core. They're going to have a rally Sunday morning in front of the Department of Ed down in Louisiana. Saturday at 10 o'clock. These Catholic parents are in an uproar down in New Orleans. I get New Orleans TV. They basically have banded together. They've got petitions going. They said, look, we're paying for this. Our kids are getting a good education. We do not want it screwed up. And I talked to some of my cousin's kids go to a private school over here by the reservoir, and she talked to their administrator to see what they were going to do, and she said, we're just going to stay the course. We're not changing our curriculum. And when people that are homeschooling or have their kids in a good private school come to me and say, look, what do we need to do? I basically advise them, stay the course. When the time comes, get them an ACT prep course. You know, let them take a few prep courses for ACT. Don't base your child's entire future on this experiment that's been rolled out by these special interests and Washington bureaucrats. So, you know, I'm going to follow the lead of the Republican National Committee and the National Federation of Republican Women and all the good think tanks across the nation that have some of the brightest researchers. You know, you got the Heritage Foundation, you've got the Cato Institute, you've got the Pacific Research Institute, you've got the Pioneer Institute, you've got the Heartland Institute, you've got the Goldwater Institute, you've got the American Principles Project, and I don't know what I'm leaving out. But basically everybody that does a lot of educational research says they have no faith in this and they think that it will be to the detriment of the American people and to our children. And the people that you think would fight it, like ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, you think they would fight it? Think the Fordham Institute might fight it. Well, you look where Bill Gates has written big checks and you'll find out why they won't take a stand. So that's basically it.
Angela?
Yes.
Let me ask this. How does our state legislature, both in the House and the Senate, how do the legislators feel about this?
The ones that have learned quite a bit about it are alarmed with it, but the ones that have just listened to the talking points and the propaganda, they don't see any problem with it. And one big problem is when you got folks like the Mississippi Economic Council that say that they're staying the course, a lot of people in leadership positions don't want to buck that large group. When you have the manufacturers that think that this is going to make them have better prepared workforce because of what they've been told, you're going to get a lot of resistance trying to change it. But y'all, I'm committed to this. I'm convicted about it. I totally believe that this is a total federal takeover. And we've just got to fight it. And these other states are figuring it out. These other legislators are figuring it out in other states. And they're having a huge backlash. I mean, even in Arizona, Jan Brewer, I think it was, signed an executive order to change the name from Common Core Standards to something else so that people wouldn't realize what it was. They want to name it something else in Arizona. Like, you know, look at the lengths that people will go to try to disguise what's truly happening. You saw the guy get arrested up in Maryland for trying to answer a question at the forum. MDE did the same thing. They made folks write on a note card or on a blue piece of paper, and then they looked at them and decided which one they were going to answer. And there's video of them rolling their eyes and making faces at the questions at the people. These are parents. These are taxpayers. They deserve to be treated with a little bit of dignity, okay? The school should not be the Gestapo force that's against parents. I mean, we need to embrace parents and try to bring parents into the fold. We complain because parents don't get involved, but then when they get involved, we want them to have them arrested. You know, it's like, which way do you want it? Yes.
There's a man right back here that had his hand up before you did.
Do we not know where this is actually headed? I mean, do we not really know where this is actually headed? If we are, we're going.
Oh, we
No,
absolutely
this is
don't
an
know.
attack against Christianity. And if I offend anybody in here, so be it. But if Obama is not the Antichrist, he's laying the way for the Antichrist. And I don't care if you voted for him or what, that's fine. But I'm going to tell you, this looks like, you know your history, you know your Bible, that the Antichrist comes from the east. And I'm not going to preach a sermon, but y'all read the Bible and read Revelations. And this is not the kind of stuff that Leningrad and Gestapo are that happening. I'm glad you mentioned Gestapo. In Nazi Germany, where they burned the books and everything else, we are blind. We live in our own little world.
So that's why
And
we got slim.
I'm telling you, that's what's happening. And even though they're getting us there inch by inch, you better look at where the final destination